Welcome to Torah Today Ministries. My name is Grant Luton,
And I'm Robin.
and we're here to discuss Torah portion Ki Tavo, which begins in Deuteronomy 26, verse 1, and continues through chapter 29, verse 8.
We were just discussing the meaning of Ki Tavo, which is when you come.
Or when you go.
And why can it be either? And why is that significant? I mean, this is so encouraging.
Well, it comes from the Hebrew word bo, which means go or come. And most of our listeners will remember that there is a Torah portion early in Exodus called bo. And it's when God tells Moses, go to Pharaoh or come to Pharaoh. And I think what God is trying to teach us through this is whenever he tells us to go somewhere, we're actually coming to a place where he's there waiting for us to come to, preparing the way. He's already there doing his work. And so we may feel like it's to go, but actually it's to come closer to God when we go to do the work he gives us to do.
Which, when you think of it in that way and you read the opening words, then it shall be when you enter the land which the Lord your God gives you as an inheritance, and you shall possess it and live in it, ... And those ... are all the things to remember and to embrace. And we need to know in order to truly receive our inheritance.
That's right. And you know, one of the things, we brought this up last week, is last week's Torah portion, Ki Tavo, means when you go out to the war. And if you recall, the portion begins with war and it ends with a reminder about the war against Amalek. And this Torah portion is when you go or come, when you enter the land. When you think about it, all those instructions in last week was about the warfare we will encounter after we come into the land. It's almost like the Torah portions are in reverse order. Because you have to go into the land before you fight the enemies waiting for you there. But God gives us the instructions about the fighting before he gives us instructions about entering.
And you know, I went back this morning and thought, where is Amalek introduced, and how is it that we make space for him and let our guard down and become vulnerable to him, which is that part of us that is the flesh that we're always going to have to master. And I went back to Exodus 17, 7 and 8, and the people at that point said, is God among us or not?
And Amalek attacked in the next verse.
And that's when he attacked.
God tolerated all of their whining and complaining up this point, and he did not correct them, he did not rebuke them. But when they said those words, is God with us or not? Is he among us or not? God got angry, and boom, Amalek attacked immediately. And you know, this entire Torah portion, Ki Tavo, is about fear of God. And so the question is, how do we define fear of God? Well, it's really simple. It's awareness of God moment by moment through the day.
And you know, as I was reading this portion, and honestly, I just sat down and read it for the first time again this year, this very morning, and I am not sitting here talking about this because I'm an expert or I'm smart. I'm sitting here talking about it because I know how important it is to share it. I have the same feeling, Grant, as I did the other night when we had some friends for dinner on Erev Shabbat, and it was a couple that we hadn't seen for a while, and she is known for her masterful cooking. I mean, she's just a perfect cook. And when we sat at the table, I looked at her and I said, just so you know, I could be too intimidated to make dinner for you, but I choose not to allow that to keep me from sharing this table with you, because I want to spend time with you, and I want to fellowship with you. So my food might not be perfect, but this is the best I have for us to sit and share together. And that's how I feel today as we sit and we come to Torah table.
Well, just for your own information, I thought your meal was perfect.
Well, you're kind. And let's go ahead then and share what we have with the people listening, because it's a feast.
It is. Well, last week, Ki Tavo, it's all about warfare, but the body of the Torah portion is about respect for others, how you treat one another. And by showing love to one another is how I defeat Amalek in my life. This week, it's about fear of God. That's how we enter the land. We have to come into the land out of fear of God. And that fear of God is a Victor Miller. He's a ultra-Orthodox Jew who just died a few years ago, but he was, I'm trying to think of a Christian teacher you could compare him to, because Victor was a fiery teacher of Torah, but very humorous as well. And a no-nonsense guy.
Maybe a Dietrich Bonhoeffer or something.
I think he's more lighthearted than Dietrich Bonhoeffer was. Poor Dietrich. I mean, he was writing from Nazi Germany, but Victor said, you have to know that you're in this world for one reason only, to become more and more aware of God. That's why you're alive now. And that is how we occupy the inheritance God has for us, to be constantly aware of his presence, constantly. And so this whole Torah portion is about showing gratitude to God, recognizing what he's done, being careful to always remember him, to not forget him, and then the curses that come if you do forget him, and you become complacent, and you become ungrateful.
You know who wasn't and isn't aware or fearful to be in the presence of God? That is Amalek. Amalek has no fear of God. And the word tells us that Amalek will target those who are a little bit weaker, or maybe at the end of the line, or at the last of the crowd, because they're vulnerable. And how wicked, how terrible is that? So we not only have to protect ourselves, but we have to strengthen one another.
Yes.
And watch out for one another. And that's what community is for.
Well, you know, David was considered the greatest king of Israel. And this is why the Messiah is called the son of David. Even though he's a son of Solomon as well, he's always referred to as the Ben David, the son of David. Well, here are David's dying words. He's on his deathbed. These are the last words David spoke on this earth. They're found in 2 Samuel chapter 23, verses 3 and 4. And David says this, when one rules justly over men, ruling in the fear of God, when he rules in the fear of God, this constant awareness of God's presence at every moment, he, the king, dawns on them like the morning light, like the sun shining forth on a cloudless morning, like rain that makes grass to sprout from the earth. That is what a person in authority who has a fear of God is like to those who look up to him or up to her. They're like light shining in the morning, like the rain that's shining on the grass, like the dew. It gives life. And but a person who has no fear of God is going to be always fearful of people.
Well,
they're going to be a horrible ruler.
It's funny. I was thinking along the same lines this morning, and I asked myself the question: what is the key to really having a healthy awareness of God? And interestingly, another quote from David came to my mind, and it's from Psalm 16, and he says, "I have set the Lord continually before me, because He is at my right hand. I won't be shaken." In other words, as long as I'm aware of him, always there, seeing life through his reality and presence, I am not going to topple over.
And read that verse one more time. What is the reference?
Psalm 16:8.
And read it one more time, please.
I have set the Lord continually before me, because He is at my right hand. I will not be shaken.
Well, that opening part of the verse, and it's usually translated, I've set Adonai before me always. It seems like every synagogue I've ever gone into, I look up on the wall, and somewhere in the synagogue, it's on the wall, right up in prominent place, to remind the people that we should set God before us always. I want to then quote something that was by David. I want to quote a couple passages from Solomon in Proverbs. Proverbs 14, verses 26 and 27 says, in the fear of Adonai, one has strong confidence. Now, this is the funny thing. Fearful people are not confident people. But people who fear Adonai, they're very confident. In the fear of Adonai, one has strong confidence, and his children will have a refuge. The fear of Adonai is a fountain of life, that one may turn away from the snares of death. And then Proverbs 19:23. The fear of Adonai leads to life. And whoever has it rests satisfied. He will not be visited by harm. So if we have a healthy awe of God and a fear of Adonai, constantly aware of his presence in our life, we don't have to be afraid of anything else ever.
No, including the stupid stuff that other people do that we feel like affects our life in a way that can ruin it.
Yes.
Because if we really know what God has said and believe it, we realize nobody has the power to ruin our life unless we permit it.
So true. And sometimes I think we get, because you don't hear a fear of God taught in churches very much. And when I'm in conversation with Christians, the fear of God's not mentioned. And there seems to be an attitude among a lot of Christians that, well, now that I know Jesus, I don't need to fear God anymore. But the thing is, here's what Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 7:1. He says, since we have these promises, beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from every defilement of body and spirit, bringing holiness to completion in the fear of God. The fear of God is something that we as believers in Yeshua should have even more than anybody else. Because with his Spirit with us, we should be constantly aware of him, constantly aware he's watching us, and that we can speak to him. He speaks to us. If I think I'm all alone and nobody sees, then it's easy to be tempted to do something I shouldn't do. But if someone else with me, especially somebody I love and respect, is right beside me, I'm not going to do things that I might do if I was in private. And when you look at this Torah portion in chapter 28, you have all these curses. I mean, they're pretty severe.
Right.
But if you look at the sins that are listed in chapter 27 at the end, there are 12 sins in the last verses of the chapter. You'll notice something interesting about every one of these 12 sins. They're all secret sins. Every one of them is a secret sin. And so God is saying, when you get into the land and you've settled it and you're all separated out from the camps and you're all in your own homes, on your own farms, and your own places, it's going to be real easy for you to fall into secret sins because you're not crowded right next to somebody else's tent.
Or you think, I've heard it, I know it, and now I don't need to review it. Yesterday, after a really special gathering we had on Sabbath, you said something that I just so appreciate. You said, Robin, I'm becoming so conscious of how when we come together with believers, it isn't about learning new information. It's about seeing God more clearly.
I really believe that.
I do too. So that is the reason that this is reiterating all the things that they had learned already, so that they could begin to remember and continue to see him clearly. So let's start talking about it.
Fear of God means you have clear spiritual eyesight. If you don't fear God, you're blind.
Right.
You're really blind.
Yeah, and we all struggle with it. It's a constant tension that we have to work on.
Because we live in a world that wants to distract us from awareness of God at every moment. Okay, so how do you want to move forward here?
Let's move forward with the chapter that the portion opens with, chapter 26. Because it seems to me that as Moses is reviewing the things that God wants the people to remember, there are some key ones. They're recalling their history, and then it's like, don't forget, be grateful.
Yeah.
Be grateful.
Don't forget where you came from.
Don't forget. Don't take credit for what I've given you and think you did it on your own. And then don't forget to tithe, because that's a reminder to yourself that you're not forgetting where all of your blessings come from. And then also, when you give special attention to the orphan and the widow.
Yes.
Because this not only blesses those who are more unfortunate, but it contributes to the health of the entire community.
Yes.
And then also intercede for others. Intercede for others and stand and encourage and pray and realize you are not separate from
That's
the others.
Right. That is right.
So those are some of the things I saw when I looked at chapter 26.
Well, it's so true. And I've been studying Psalm 33 because I plan to teach on that psalm in the next day or so. And in Psalm 33, there's this, which every psalm I happen to be studying is my new favorite psalm.
I've noticed that. It happens to me
So this
too.
is my favorite psalm
For now.
Psalm 33. But he says this amazing thing. It's where he talks about how God has created our hearts. In verse 15, it says, "He who fashions the hearts of them all." But some translations, more literal, is that he who fashions their heart together. But that still doesn't make a lot of sense. But Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch translates it, and he created their hearts to rely on one another.
Right.
And it's like God, when he created all the human hearts in all of history, they're all like separate pieces of a puzzle. They're all created to fit together to make this picture. So just as the Israelites were to take care of the priest, the Kohanim, these are the ones who taught the scriptures, who oversaw the sacrifices, who maintained the tabernacle. They were people who helped take care of the Israelites. I need help take care of them. But also, like you said, I have to take care of the orphan, the widow, people who can't take care of themselves.
Exactly. I mean, he takes care of us, and we're needy, and then we suddenly become all self-sufficient and forget those who we are responsible for extending our hands to.
Exactly right.
Can I take a minute to read the final 4 verses of chapter 26, Grant? Because,
Absolutely.
this is what he wants for us. It says, "This day the Lord your God commands you..."
And we're starting verse 16, correct?
Correct.
Yes, okay.
"This day the Lord your God commands you to do these statutes and ordinances. You shall therefore be careful to do them." How? "With all your heart and with all your soul." In other words, be wholehearted about this. And then the next verse, "You have today declared the Lord to be your God." So this is who you say you are. "And that you would walk in his ways and keep his statutes, his commandments, and his ordinances, and listen to his voice. The Lord has today declared you to be who? To be his people, a treasured possession.
Segula.
As he promised you. And that you should keep all his commandments, and that he will," what, Grant? Here's how, this is what he wants. "That he will set you high above all nations."
That word high or supreme is the word Elyon. God is called El Elyon, the supreme God, but he wants to make us supreme over all the nations.
And also the word "you" there is collective and individual. He does it as a nation, and he does it as individuals. So I'll back up and start 19 again.
Yes, please.
"That he will set you high above all nations, and he which he has made for" what?
For praise,
for fame, honor, and that you shall be a consecrated people to the Lord your God, as he has spoken." How many of us want somebody in our life to change? And we want them to stop walking in the ways that are self-destructive and is separating and being a huge barrier between them and ourselves being able to be close. It might be a spouse, it might be our kids, it might be friends. And we think, oh, if only I could explain it to them, and if only they would do this, and if only they would come and listen to this teacher with me, and I think I'll send them a tape. Maybe if they listen to this and see this. You know what he says? If you will do what I've asked you to do, I will set you apart.
Yes.
And others will see it, and you'll be honored, and you'll be recognized as a precious possession to me.
Yes.
That is what he wants us to do.
Yeah, that's That word for, he says, for praise, for renown, for splendor. It's one of my favorite Hebrew words. It's the word tiferet.
Which means beauty, right?
It means beauty, beauty that comes from perfect symmetry. And it's one of the titles for Messiah in the prophets. And but he says, I want to be for him a treasured people, and that word there, segulah. And it's used a couple times in the Brit Kadashah. I'm trying to find, I'm in 1 John instead of 1 Peter, but 1 Peter 2:9, where King James translates it to being a peculiar people.
Well, I know plenty of people who are plenty peculiar, but not in a way that reflects being treasured.
But Peter quotes this passage in Deuteronomy. He says, but you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession, so that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who has called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. For once you are not a people, but now you are the people of God. You had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. So just as the Israelites were called out of Egypt, God formed them into a people, equipped them with his Torah, placed his presence, his house, his tabernacle in their midst, taught them how to fight war. Now he's bringing them across into the land of their inheritance that he promised their forefathers.
And he's waiting for them there.
They're his treasured people.
Oh, you know, as we go on and start to look at some of the details of this message, I'm remembering that yesterday, after this rich conversation we had with some friends on Sabbath, we kept looking at each other and repeating over and over. So then the secret is humility. And the word humility kept coming up over and over and over, to never forget that what he has spoken is relevant to me, because I am not beyond forgetting who he is.
Oh, we are so easy to forget.
I read a story recently that it made me smile because I can relate to it, and it's the true story of a teacher that addressed his class and says, so with all the required readings in this course you just took, what did you find the least interesting? And he gave his students an opportunity to answer, and he let them. And then when they all gave these answers of things that they just found completely uninteresting, he wrote another question on the board. He said, to what defect in yourself do you attribute this lack of interest?
I love that. I love that.
So if you find something in the Word, or something that he has given us as uninteresting, it's due to a defect in us.
Yes, it's some dead spot in our souls that it cannot find interest in things that interest God.
So we have to return to humility.
We do.
Well, let's humbly go forward. This fly, we have a fly that keeps landing on our head here
Well, you know,
it's annoying. It's like Amalek. It won't go away.
Well, you know, something crosses my mind, and I want everyone to be careful as they hear me say this. But this Torah portion talks a lot about tithing, and throughout chapter 26 especially, about the tithe. And this Torah portion is about fear of God. And one of the things I found is that people in my life who I know have an awareness of God, they all tithe.
Well, it's a natural response.
It is. People who don't tithe, I'm not going to make a condemning statement and say, well, they have no fear of God, they're not aware of God. But if you are one of the listeners and you're not tithing, you're not taking 10% of what God has given you and investing it in some way in his kingdom, why? You do not believe that you're going to be held to account for not being generous in return as God has been generous to you? But if you're constantly aware of God's presence in your life,
there's no hesitation.
And you know that the Master said, as you've freely received, so freely give, and you're not freely giving. Maybe you love money a little too much. Maybe that's become a bit of an idol. Maybe you don't really believe God watches you and takes care of you every moment of the day. Maybe there's not a fear of God. But
So
it's
when
just a
he-
question, a challenge.
So when he commands the people to bring the first fruits of what they have and offer it up to him, it isn't because he needs it.
He doesn't need it.
It's because they need to demonstrate
Yes.
that they know where it came
Yes.
from.
Because like it says in 26:9, he brought us to this place. He gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And now behold, I have brought the first fruit of the ground that you have given me.
Right.
Tithing is a way of recognizing God as the owner of the world and the source of every blessing in our life.
Right.
And if we really believe that, then there's plenty more from where this has come from. So let's tithe. Let's give it away. Let's act in faith and give some of our precious money to people who need it, to ministries who need it, and give it away.
I have a friend who's always extravagant and she's so generous. And I told her once, I said, "You are such an extravagant giver." And she said, "Well, why can't I or shouldn't I be?
Yeah.
My God is an extravagant giver."
He is so extravagant.
So let's move to chapter 27.
Sure.
This is fascinating. We return to Mount Ebal. Let's remind each other what that represents and what God is saying
Right.
through Moses for the people to do here.
Well, when they go across the Jordan, and of course after they defeat Jericho, they're going to come to this valley, the valley of Shechem, or Shechem as it's pronounced in Hebrew, and it's between Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. Mount Ebal is this really desolate mountain, just all rock and sand, and nothing much grows there. Mount Gerizim is green and lush and beautiful. And so he wants the tribe to divide up, 6 on one, 6 on the other, with the priest down the bottom with the ark of the Lord. And the priests are going to pronounce a curse. And we know from Jewish tradition, the way this is done is that the people standing on Mount Ebal would pronounce the cursed, like in verse 15, "Accursed is the man who will make a graven or molten image, an abomination of Adonai." Then the people of Mount Gerizim would say the opposite. "Blessed is the man who will not make a graven or molten image and an abomination of Adonai." So these are the blessings and the curses. Curses spoken on Mount Ebal, blessings on Mount Gerizim. And but on the mountain, God wanted them to stack stones, cover them with plaster, and write the Torah on there.
Which is so interesting that they're on the mountain that represents living where Amalek wants us to live and forgetting to have him before us and allowing ourselves to just doubt. And he says, all right, even if you've gotten to this place and you have forgotten me and you're surrounded by desolation, it's not too late.
Yeah.
This is what you do. Let's make a pile of stones, cover it with plaster, and write the word, and so it'll be there to remember.
Right.
In other words,
A memorial.
so just remembering and returning is all he's requiring them to do. He's giving them provision for being on Mount Ebal.
That's right. And so there's a constant memorial there. It's a beautiful picture. And then, you know how Abraham, when God made a blood covenant with him, the animals were cut in half and God passed between the two halves. Well, here they got two mountains, and all the people are going to pass between the two mountains as they enter this covenant of living according to God's commandments as they enter the land. So we pass between the two mountains, between the curses and the blessings.
And then he tells them to build an altar.
Yes.
And he says, don't make it fancy. Keep it uncut stones, and then offer upon that simple, basic pile of stones the thing that you should bring to me. And I guess the phrase that kept coming to me today is keep it real.
Yeah, keep it real.
Keep it real.
Yeah. Well, you know, the first thing Abraham did when he crossed the Jordan River into Canaan is he built an altar. And that's what God wants these people to do. Is when you come across the Jordan, you come to the land, I want you to build an altar. I want you to walk in the steps of Abraham, who followed me by faith. And as children of Abraham, I want you to do the same. And in Romans, Paul talks to us Gentiles and says, if we walk in the steps of Abraham, in other words, walk by faith, we're children of Abraham.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the invitation God has for us, just to hear his voice, choose to walk away from the culture of the world, and walk in his steps, become his children.
So do you know what we tend to do? We tend to make that pile of rocks when God does something spectacular and we happen to notice him finally, when he's been there all along anyway. And we cover it with plaster, and we might write his word on it and give him credit initially, but then it becomes about the pile of rocks.
Yes.
And we begin to think that it's our building, that pile of rocks, that gives that whole memory or event significance. We forget that it's the word that's written into the limestone on those rocks. That's the important part.
Well, the moment we get used to seeing something, we don't see it anymore.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We get so used to seeing it, we don't see it anymore.
You know that indifference, even in a marriage, when you start taking each other for granted.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the purpose for Shabbat and for the holy days that roll around at the regular intervals, is so they are times for remembering.
And keeping it fresh.
Remembering all the
and
time.
real. Yes.
Well, you know, I'm just looking here. Our time is gone, but we're not done yet. So we have a few things to do. One of the important things in chapter 28, God just spells out in detail what's going to happen to Israel if they drift away from him, get into idolatry and to sin, forget his covenant. And he tells them in detail. He almost writes Israel's history ahead of time. And these things happen to Israel exactly as they're detailed here.
And it's a warning.
It is a warning. Now, I don't want to take time to read through all of it, but there are 3 things. God gives the 3 reasons why these horrible things befall them. And it's important for us to remember these 3 things so that we don't become guilty of them. The first is in chapter 28, verse 45. All these curses will come upon you and pursue you and overtake you until you are destroyed, because, here it is, you will not have listened to the voice of Adonai your God to guard his commandments and decrees he commanded you. So the first is disobedience. Disobedience, just not doing what he said to do. The second one is verse 47. Because, here's the next because you did not serve Adonai your God amid gladness and goodness of heart when everything was abundant.
Isn't that something?
So here we see ingratitude.
Yeah.
They became ungrateful people. They got, there have been times in my life I got used to being saved. I took salvation and God's grace in my life for granted. And when you forget that God has done these things for you, you become ungrateful. You take them for granted.
And you start taking credit for it yourself.
That's right. The third one is down in verse 58. If you will not be careful to perform all the words of this Torah that are written in this book, to fear this honored and awesome name, Adonai your God. They lost their fear of God. It was irreverence. It was a lack of fear of God. They no longer recognized that he was with them. They were no longer aware of him. It was just irreverence and lack of fear of God. So there they are. Disobedience, ingratitude, and then just no fear of God.
Well, in wrapping up, one of the questions that came to my mind that I know others have as well, when I read all these curses and things that can happen to us, it's easy to say, well, okay then, does that mean that any suffering I'm going through in my life is because I've been a bad girl? Or, is it my fault? Is this punishment? Is pain because I'm not obeying God the way I should?
Sometimes it is.
And sometimes it's because other people are making mistakes.
We suffer for our own sins, but we all suffer for the sins of others.
Because we're connected.
Yeah. Well, we can blame everything on Adam and Eve. We all suffer because of their sin.
I call it collateral damage.
Yes.
We may not be directly responsible for making a decision, but we're all connected. So those, especially those closest to us.
And others suffer because of our sins.
Right.
I mean, over our 44 years of being married, there are times I was a real knucklehead and made you suffer because I was an idiot.
And vice versa.
I don't remember those.
I'm sure you
But
do.
anyways, but you know what? We have to suffer for our own sins is called discipline, and it's to correct us. And we need to repent and correct and deal with that. But when other people mess up, what we have to do is cover it with love, because love covers a multitude of sins. That's in the apostolic scriptures, but it's a quote from Proverbs.
And like you told me this morning and reminded me, our Messiah was one who was so acquainted with grief and suffered beyond anything we can imagine.
Man of sorrows, acquainted with grief.
And he never sinned.
No. So all the suffering he experienced was for the sin of others, not his own. He didn't have any.
So should we be shocked?
No.
When we find ourselves in a predicament and experiencing the collateral damage or the discomfort because someone else has messed up.
So what did he model when he suffered for the sake of others? He modeled grace and forgiveness. Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they do, and love. So when we suffer because of the sins of others, that's an opportunity for us to model Messiah. But what do we tend to do? Gripe and complain and blame, and we want them to pay for that. I need to give them a piece of my mind. And Yeshua just shakes his head and says, oh, have you learned anything at all?
And the other thing that we talked about earlier that I thought was amazing to think about is, the sins of others literally put Yeshua on the cross. But that wasn't the end of the story.
No, not at all.
Because there's resurrection and there's life at the other side of that. Yeah. So no matter what we are experiencing, the end of the story is restoration.
That's right.
And life.
That's
and
right.
Wholeness. Even if it's in the next world, that is the end of the story.
And one of the things I want to close with from my side, and you may have something more to add, and you know, when you read chapter 28, it's just downright depressing when you read all these horrible things. And you think, oh, where's God in the middle of all this? Well, a rabbi some time back went and counted all the letters in chapter 28, this chapter of these horrible curses and the horrible things that would befall Israel. And when he counted all the letters in the chapter, he discovered there were 676 letters, exactly 676. That's the numerical value of the word ra'ot, which means evils. Evils. But this number is also equal to 26 times 26.
Wow.
And 26 is the number of God's name. In other words, God is saying, even in all your rebellions, your ingratitude, your irreverence, your forgetting me, your disobedience, in all of that, and all the horrible things that happen to you, I'm in the middle of it. I'm with you, that you don't see me, you may not acknowledge me. I am in the middle of all of it. He brings them out. He restores them, brushes them off, restores them to life, and takes them as his people. So even in the middle of all of our pain and what looks like chaos, God says, no, I've got it.
Yeah.
Just trust me.
So we can maintain that glad heart.
So fear him, which means to be aware of him all the time. And maybe we won't have to suffer as much as we will if we forget him.
I have nothing to add to that.
Okay, well. Oh, what a great portion. Ki Tavo.
Well, I hope everybody is encouraged to read it and not be overwhelmed by it and not assume that it isn't relevant and instructional and important. Let's keep preparing ourselves for the holiday around the corner.
That's right. And this Torah, these words, are all designed for us today in 2023. That's for sure.
That's why we have Torah today.
Torah today, right.
All right.
And with that,
shalom,
we wish
everyone.
You shalom. God bless.
Thank you for joining us for today's teaching. If the work of Torah Today Ministries has touched your life, please consider making a donation or sponsoring an upcoming video. As a video sponsor, you'll have an exclusive opportunity to memorialize a family member, celebrate a special event, or simply support the ongoing creation of similar content. Your tax-deductible contribution helps ensure that our teachings continue to reach all who are longing for truth. Click the link or visit our website to learn more.